So we finished last week talking about minimalism, and we're going to move now to conceptualism. I think this is a furthering of this notion of the dematerialization of the artwork and thinking about this shift in the role of the artist. That what is not important is this kind of peek into the inner psychology of the artist or where the artist has left his or her mark, but instead, for conceptual art, as the name suggests, the concept is the most important piece of a work of art. Think about Dada, Ready-Mades, and Duchamp. And how they planted the seed of conceptual art with the notion that it's the idea, it is not the tangible object that is most important. For conceptual artists, ideas and forms are one and the same. They cannot be separated. And form in conceptual art can be many different things. It can be ready-made objects, performance pieces, photographs, essays, films. It's a way, like minimalist art, it's a way to get out of the capitalist art market system that treats art solely as consumer products to be bought and sold. A furthering of that dematerialization, as I mentioned, carried out by the minimalists. And art really is moving into the realm of language, rhetoric, and information. And I think Joseph Kosuth's 1 in 3 Chairs is a great example of that. This was first shown in the mid-60s at a MoMA exhibition called Information. And what we see is a photograph of a chair on the wall, that physical object on the gallery floor, and then finally, the dictionary definition of chair. There's a commentary here about the relationship between reality and representation, between language and objects. What is the true chair? Is it the words we use to describe the object chair? Is it the chair itself? Does a photograph of a chair, does that also mean the same thing? It gets into the importance of semiotics. Semiotics is the field that investigates this relationship between language and things, between signs and symbols. When we move to new media, and we've already talked a little bit about Nam June Paik, the father of video art, and here we're going to also look at the use of video and different kind of new media. So Bill Viola's The Crossing is a room-sized video installation that comprises large two-sided screens onto which a pair of video sequences is simultaneously projected. And we're looking at these two screens side by side here. So they both open in the same way. A male figure walks slowly towards the camera. His body is dramatically lit from above, so he's kind of glowing against this stark black background. Then he pauses and stands still, looking motionless into the camera. And this is where the two scenes diverge, because in one, a small fire alights below the figure's feet. That's what we see on the right. It spreads and engulfs his whole body in flames, and he still stands completely still. On the opposite screen, the same thing happens, but with water, where it begins as a light rainfall, and then we build up to this huge cascade of water that subsumes the figure entirely. There's a kind of, meditative or almost contemplative response here that Viola is interested in, that requires the viewer to concentrate for a long duration of time and to also increase his or her own awareness of small details, small changes in movement. This is consistent with the artist's intent to reignite the long-standing relationship between an artistic and a spiritual experience. Viola is a practitioner of Zen Buddhism, and he explains that after 50 minutes of quiet stillness in a room of solitary individuals, which could also be a description of a museum goer's experience, that he says time opens up in an unbelievable way. So we might view the crossing through this lens of mythology or religious thought, even though the work does not make reference to any specific religious iconography. But, it might conjure up a connection here to the ring of flames that surrounds the images of Shiva Nataraja, an example of Hindu art. And I think that, Viola isn't interested in referencing one of these particular traditions, but certainly interested in creating a kind of transcendent artistic and spiritual experience. Let's go back to Nam June Paik and look at his electronic superhighway. We see over 300 TV screens that form the map of the United States that's outlined in neon. It's a whole room-size installation, 40 feet long, 15 feet high, and within each state, the screen displays video clips that resonates with the state's unique popular mythology. So for example, in Kansas, we see a continuous loop from The Wizard of Oz. The states are firmly defined, but they're also linked by this network of neon lights, which kind of echoes the network of interstate highways that were built across the US. And some of you might be familiar with how there's kind of two sides to the expansion of the interstate. On one side, it made transportation, long-distance transportation, faster and easier in the US, but in other cases, in cities like Denver or Milwaukee, often those interstate highways were built through minority neighborhoods, through Black and brown neighborhoods, purposely cutting off those neighborhoods from grocery stores, from schools, from other parts of the city. Now, this work is housed in the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and it's really an icon of America in the information age. It poses some really interesting and challenging questions, I think, about how technology impacts our culture. For example, the number of simultaneous clips and the scale make it difficult to absorb any details in a feeling that we all now know as information overload. There's this visual tension between the static brightness of the neons, the brightness of the screens. There's this kind of divided attention between the national and the local frames of reference. And I think in 2020, we can think about how we could update this installation for the digital age. I mean, this work is 25 years old. What has changed and what has remained the same over the past 25 years? Eva Hesse's work is often under the category of process art. It's we're going to consider it kind of as a standalone example that has ties to minimalism and conceptualism. It is certainly not part of new media. Hesse, she sought to return a bit of biography, a bit of personality, a bit of thingness to art making. She felt like minimalism and conceptual art had become too ethereal, too heady, and that led to some elitism. And instead, her work No Title substitutes fragile substances and irregular organic forms for the rigid geometries and the industrial materials of minimalism. This is one of her last works before she died at the age of 34 from cancer. And to create it, Hesse dipped 2 separate pieces of knotted rope into liquid latex. The rope then hardened, and it provided this kind of web-like structure, all of these kind of graceful arching loops and these twisted segments that we see here. It's attached to the ceilings and walls, but these placements are flexible to allow for variable installations. And Hesse was interested in this kind of mutability and this kind of evolving or ever-changing relationship between the artwork and the site, and thus between the artwork and the viewers.